She pressed herself against the cold glass wall of the conference room, arms crossed tight over her chest, when Lawson Mercer reached toward her. "Don't," Bex Danner said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, barely above a whisper, the words scraped raw. Lawson's hand stopped midair. His eyes moved from her face down to her forearm, where the sleeve of her cardigan had ridden up during her reflexive recoil. The bruises were ugly things, deep purple and greenish black, shaped unmistakably like fingers. Someone's grip hard enough to leave a map of their violence on her skin. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Tell me," Lawson said very quietly, "who did that to you?" That was 3 hours ago. Before any of that, Bex Danner was no one. That was the truth of it, and she had made a kind of peace with the fact. She was the data compliance analyst who occupied the second desk from the fire exit on the 4th floor of Meridian Supply Partners' Chicago headquarters. A tower of glass and steel rising above the South Loop that smelled always of cold air and expensive ambition. Bex was not expensive. She wore the same rotation of oversized cardigans in various shades of oatmeal and grey, her dark hair pinned back with a ballpoint pen more often than not. Her reading glasses perpetually smudged at one corner. She was 28 years old, generously built, and entirely invisible to the 47 people who shared her floor. She preferred it that way. Meridian Supply Partners moved pharmaceutical inventory across 9 Midwestern states. A legitimate business on paper, pristine FDA certifications, an impeccable safety record, contracts with 4 of the top 10 hospital networks in the country, and underneath all of that, a persistent, low-frequency hum that Bex had been trained, professionally, to ignore. The kind of hum that came from walking past conference rooms, where conversations stopped the moment someone opened the door. The kind that explained why the senior logistics team worked exclusively on the 15th floor and traveled in pairs. The kind that had made her predecessor quit without notice 6 months before Bex took the job. Bex had a gift for ignoring things that were better left alone. She had been good at that her entire life. Until Thursday. It was a Thursday in late March, the sky over Lake Michigan flat and gray as a sheet of tin when she found the gap. She almost missed it. It lived inside a procurement ledger she was cross-referencing against DEA 222 forms, routine paperwork, the kind that made other analysts' eyes glaze over within 30 seconds. But Bex had an unusual brain. She saw numbers the way some people saw faces, instantly, holistically, with a clarity that caught incongruities before her conscious mind had even named them. The shipment variance was $3.8 million, spread across 7 months and 14 regional distribution hubs, each discrepancy small enough to look like rounding error, together unmistakable as design. Someone at Meridian was diverting scheduled narcotic shipments before they reached the hospital networks, replacing the inventory with counterfeit product. The real drugs were going somewhere else entirely. Bex sat very still for a long time, staring at her screen. Outside her window, a pigeon landed on the ledge and regarded her with supreme indifference. The correct procedure was to report to her compliance manager, Boyd Carver. She knew that. Boyd had an open-door policy, a collection of motivational posters above his desk, and the kind of aggressively pleasant demeanor that Bex had always found slightly exhausting. She printed the analysis, tucked it into a manila folder, and went to find him. She found Boyd in the east stairwell. She'd seen his car in the garage, and knew he used the stairs after lunch. He was on his phone when she pushed through the door, and he looked up with that familiar, easy smile, which evaporated the instant he saw the folder in her hand. Bex explained what she'd found in the time it took him to cross the distance between them. Boyd listened, and then Boyd did something that would stay with her for a very long time. His face went completely, eerily blank, like someone had pulled a plug somewhere behind his eyes. His hand closed around her wrist before she understood what was happening. The grip was crushing, her small bones grinding together under his fingers, and he shoved her backward into the wall hard enough to knock the folder from her hand, papers scattering across the concrete landing. "You didn't find anything." His voice was low and controlled. Not shouting. That was the worst part. The total absence of heat, like someone calmly discussing inventory counts. "You're going to go back to your desk, delete the query logs, and forget every number in that folder. And if I hear that you said one word to anyone, one word, Bex, they're going to find you floating in the Chicago River. Do you understand me?" She nodded. She couldn't speak. His fingers were still crushing her wrist, and the edges of her vision had gone white. Boyd let go. He gathered the papers from the floor, tucked them under his arm, and walked back down the stairs without looking at her again. Bex stood in the stairwell for 4 minutes. She counted them. Then she went back to her desk, deleted the query logs, put on her coat, and went home. She stood in the bathroom of her Wicker Park apartment for a long time, looking at her arm. The bruises came up fast. She'd always bruised easily, her pale skin recording damage with a kind of faithfulness that felt almost accusatory. She pulled her cardigan sleeve down over them and went to sit on her couch with a cup of tea she didn't drink. She would quit. She would find another job. There were other jobs. But on Friday morning, before she'd written a single word of a resignation letter, 2 men in suits she didn't recognize appeared beside her desk. "Mr. Mercer would like to see you," one of them said. It was not, she understood immediately, a request. The elevator to the executive suite felt like traveling upward into a different atmosphere. The 14th floor was all dark oak paneling, high ceilings, and the kind of silence that comes from quality soundproofing. Bex was ushered through double doors into a corner office that looked out over the entirety of the South Loop, with the silver ribbon of the Chicago River visible far below. Lawson Mercer stood with his back to the door, hands in the pockets of a charcoal suit that had clearly been made for his particular body, watching the city. He was taller than she'd realized from the few times she'd seen him in all-staff meetings, where he tended to look like a man waiting to be somewhere more important. He turned when she entered, and for a moment he simply looked at her. Bex had looked Lawson Mercer up the year she took the job. He was 37, Stanford MBA, built Meridian from a regional distributor into a 9-state operation in under a decade. The profile pieces used words like visionary and relentless. In person, he had dark hair going grey at the temples, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from something expensive, and eyes that were a very specific shade of grey-green that she found difficult to hold for reasons she couldn't entirely explain. "Bex," he said. His voice was lower than she expected, a baritone that seemed to fill the room without effort. "Sit down." She sat in one of the chairs across from his desk, pulling her cardigan closed instinctively over her forearms. "I run internal data audits on all analyst workstations quarterly," Lawson said, circling the desk slowly. He didn't rush anything. "The system flagged an unusual query pattern on your terminal yesterday afternoon. A variance analysis cross-referencing DEA 222 filings against actual procurement for 7 months across 14 hubs." He paused. "You found the gap." Bex's throat was very dry. "But you didn't bring it to me." His voice was even, almost conversational, but there was something underneath it that made her want to be very careful with her next words. "Why?" "I took it to my compliance manager, Boyd Carver." Lawson went very still. He rose from his chair and came around the desk, slowly, deliberately, and the space in the room seemed to contract. He reached out toward her, intending, she thought, only to get her attention. A touch on the shoulder, nothing more. But her body didn't know that. Her body remembered the stairwell, the grip, the wall. She pressed herself against the cold glass behind her, arms crossed hard over her chest, when his hand came toward her. "Don't," Bex said. The word was barely there. Lawson's hand stopped. The easy, unreadable expression on his face shifted. His eyes dropped to her forearm, where her cardigan sleeve had ridden up during her flinch, and the bruises were completely, undeniably visible in the clean morning light of his office. purple-black fingerprints wrapped around her wrist like a brand. The air changed. "Tell me," Lawson said very quietly, "who did that to you?" Bex closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, Lawson had not moved. He was not looming over her. He'd taken a step back, giving her space, but the stillness radiating off him was not patience. It was something held on an extremely short leash. "Boyd," she said. "He found me in the east stairwell. He told me to delete the logs and forget everything I found, or he'd—" She stopped. He was very specific about the river. Lawson turned away from her. He walked to the windows and stood there for a moment with his back to her, and Bex watched the muscles in his jaw work once, twice. He did not throw anything. He did not raise his voice. He took out his phone and made a call. "Find Carver," he said to whoever answered. "Right now, wherever he is. Bring him to the warehouse on Kedzie." A pause. "Yes, that one." He ended the call and turned back to Bex. "The variance you found, the diverted inventory, that's $3.8 million over 7 months, routed through 14 hubs." "Yes." "Did you document it anywhere outside the company system?" Bex hesitated. Then she reached into the bag she'd been clutching against her side and withdrew a small flash drive, the kind you could buy at any Walgreens, anonymous and grey. She'd copied the raw data files before deleting the query logs, working fast, hands shaking, not entirely sure why, except that it felt like the one smart thing she could do in a situation where all her options were terrible. She held it out to him. He took it carefully, as if she'd handed him something that mattered. "You did the right thing," he said. "Boyd could have killed me," Bex said, because she needed to say it out loud to make it real. "I know." Lawson's expression was not apologetic, exactly. It was more like a man who had just added an entry to a list. "Boyd isn't going to be a problem anymore, but I need you to listen to me, because we have a larger one." He set the flash drive on his desk and looked at her directly. "Boyd Carver doesn't have the access to orchestrate a 7-month diversion at that scale without authorization from somewhere above his pay grade. Someone commissioned this, and whoever that person is, they know you found the thread, because Boyd told them the moment he walked out of that stairwell." Bex felt the cold spread from her chest outward. "Which means going home right now," Lawson continued, "is not safe." She didn't argue. There was something about the way he said it, not alarmist, just factual, like reading a weather report, that told her he was not the kind of man who invented emergencies. Within 20 minutes, she was in the back of a black Suburban with tinted windows, moving north through Chicago traffic. Lawson sat beside her, his long frame taking up most of the seat, radiating a heat she found inexplicably steadying. They crossed the river and kept going. The apartment was in Lincoln Park, on the top floor of a narrow brownstone that didn't appear on any rental listings. It smelled of old wood and coffee, and something clean and expensive she couldn't name. The windows looked out over Oz Park, bare trees just beginning to hint at green. A man named Sutter, broad, quiet, with a scar that ran along his left cheekbone, opened the door and then disappeared somewhere into the building. "This is a place I keep that 3 people know about," Lawson said, shrugging off his jacket. "You're the 4th. The apartment was not what she'd expected from a man who occupied that office with that suit. It was spare, good furniture, original art on the walls that she recognized, an impressive library lining 2 full walls. She felt profoundly out of place. Her cardigan and her flat shoes, and the weight she carried in her hips and stomach, and the round fullness of her face. All of it felt suddenly, acutely visible in a way she usually managed to avoid thinking about. She tugged at her hem without meaning to. Lawson came back from the kitchen with a first aid kit. He sat across from her on the coffee table. Not beside her, across, leaving the space between them deliberate and respectful, and looked at her wrist. "May I?" he said. She nodded and pushed back her sleeve. His exhale was quiet, but she heard it. A sharp, controlled breath through his nose as he took in the full extent of the bruising in the apartment's clean light. His jaw set. He uncapped a small tube of arnica gel with the focused care of someone disarming a mechanism, and began to apply it with a gentleness so total and so at odds with the rest of him that Bex had to look away. "I'm not usually this," she started. "Don't," he said, not unkindly. "I was going to say fragile." "I know what you were going to say." He didn't look up from her wrist. His thumb moved in a careful arc around the edge of the bruising, never pressing into it. "And it's the wrong word." She didn't have a response for that. "You figured out in 2 hours what a team of forensic consultants has been trying to find for 4 months, Lawson said. "That's not fragile. That's a mind like a scalpel." Bex looked at him. He was still focused on her wrist, careful and precise, and she noticed for the first time the faded ink on his forearm, partially visible under his rolled-up sleeve. Something angular that disappeared under the fabric. She didn't ask. "So Boyd wasn't doing this alone," she said instead. "No." He recapped the arnica. His expression had gone back to that controlled neutral. He was the distribution point. The authorization, the access codes, the routing changes. Those came from someone higher. "I've had suspicions for a year." He paused. "His name is Devon Greaves. He's my former business partner and current majority shareholder in 3 of Meridian's subsidiary companies. He's been trying to leverage me out of operational control for 2 years, and he has been bleeding the company to fund it. And the diverted shipments go to him. Through 2 intermediary shells in Delaware and 1 in the Caymans, yes. The money is already scrubbed by the time it reaches his accounts." Lawson looked at her steadily. "But the routing itself, the data trail of how it moves, that's somewhere in those files. I've had 2 consultants try to reconstruct the pathway, and neither one got past the Delaware entities." Bex looked at the flash drive on the table between them. "I'm a compliance analyst," she said. "I know exactly what you are." A long beat passed between them. "Show me where your computer is," she said. For 6 hours, Bex did not move from the desk in the spare bedroom, where Lawson had set up a laptop with the kind of data tools she usually only dreamed about. A Palantir environment, a Bloomberg terminal, a Tableau build that probably cost more than her annual salary. Sutter brought her coffee at some point, and then disappeared again. She worked the way she always worked when numbers were involved, completely, and to the exclusion of everything else. The fear receded, the self-consciousness receded. There was only the data and the patterns inside it, and the almost physical pleasure of untangling something deliberately knotted. At some point, she registered Lawson in the doorway. She noticed him only as a presence at first. The way you register the sun shifting across a room without quite looking at it. He didn't interrupt her. When she glanced up once to reach for her coffee, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't fully name. Focused, intent, something in it that she'd never had directed at her before and wasn't sure how to hold. She looked back at the screen. At just past 11 that night, with the park outside reduced to dark shapes and streetlights, she said, "I found it." Lawson was across the room in 4 strides. The pathway was elegant, in a way she could almost admire technically. The diverted shipments were logged against Meridian's legitimate fulfillment records as returned to manufacturer, a designation that triggered no further review under standard compliance protocols. But the serial numbers on the returned inventory didn't match anything that had ever existed in Meridian's purchasing system. They were phantom SKUs, generated inside the company's own inventory management platform, which meant someone had right access to the database at a root level. Devon Greaves was on the system's access list with root credentials, inherited from his co-founder days and never revoked. More than that, the money trail ran from the Delaware entities through a private wealth management firm in Zurich, then directly into a construction holding company in Chicago's River North that Greaves was publicly invested in. The funds were being funneled straight into 2 condo development projects currently under city permitting review. "He's laundering it into Chicago real estate," Beck said, tracing the pathway on the screen. If you hand these routing records and the SCA generation logs to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, the Zurich firm's compliance obligations kick in automatically and every US-linked account freezes. He won't be able to touch the construction projects or the Cayman entities. He's completely paralyzed. Sutter let out a low, slow breath. She just found the off switch. Lawson leaned forward, his shoulder grazing hers, close enough that she could smell the wool of his jacket, and underneath it something quieter, cedar or wood smoke. "You're certain?" "The routing is right there," Bex said. "The math doesn't lie." He stayed very close for a moment longer, looking at the screen, then at her. She was aware of her heartbeat in a way she usually managed not to be. Then every light in the apartment went out. The laptop screen died, the ventilation went silent. In the complete abrupt dark, she heard Sutter say, low and tight, "Jammer, they killed the grid." The heavy sound of the front door being taken off its frame came a half second before Lawson's arm closed around her waist and hauled her out of the chair. The laptop crashed to the floor. From somewhere in the front of the apartment, there was a flat, percussive bang, and then the rapid, suppressed staccato of gunfire. "Service stairs," Lawson said against her ear, already moving, steering her into the hallway. Sutter had a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness as they moved fast toward the back of the apartment. Bex stumbling on the unfamiliar floor, Lawson's hand at her back, steady and urgent. Two men with their own flashlights were already inside, moving through the living room. Sutter pushed open the door to the back stairs and punched a code into the manual override panel. The lock disengaged. He went through first, holding it. And then from the doorway of the linen closet, a figure stepped out fast and compact, raising a short rifle towards Sutter's back. Bex didn't decide to do it. The decision happened somewhere below thought. In the part of her body that had spent 28 years being told it was too much, too heavy, too big. She drove her shoulder sideways into the figure with everything she had. It wasn't graceful. She was short and round, and she had never been in a fight in her life. But she had mass, and she had the element of surprise. And the impact threw the man into the wall hard enough that the shot he fired tore through the crown molding instead of Sutter's spine. The man backhanded her across the face. The world went sideways. She hit the doorframe on the way down, and then the floor, and the dark of the stairwell became a spinning darker dark, and she tasted blood at her lip. Bex. Lawson's voice, not controlled anymore, stripped of everything except a raw, fractured urgency she had never heard from anyone aimed at her. His hands were on her face, her shoulders, checking her. "Bex, look at me." "I'm okay," she managed. The floor was cold and very solid beneath her, and that was grounding. "I'm okay." He pulled her upright, and she let him because her legs were doing something untrustworthy. She heard Sutter say, clinically from the direction of the closet, that they needed to move immediately. Lawson pulled her against his side, and they went down the stairs. The safe house was a loft in Pilsen, above a commercial laundry closed at this hour. It smelled of clean linen and machine oil, and it was, against all logic, the most solid Bex had felt in 2 days. There was a cot in the back office, and an industrial sink, and a first aid kit zip-tied to the wall. Bex sat on the edge of the cot, while Sutter stood at the exterior door, and Lawson crouched in front of her, cleaning the blood from her split lip with a careful, practiced hand. "Why did you do that?" he asked. His voice still had rough edges, not yet smoothed back into its usual register. Bex considered the question seriously. "Because you were protecting me," she said. "Since the moment I walked into your office, you were protecting me. And I have spent my entire life waiting for people to notice I was worth protecting." She stopped, her throat felt tight. "And they didn't. Most of them looked right through me, or they looked at me, and saw everything that was wrong with the way I take up space in a room. So when I had the chance to do something instead of waiting..." She shook her head. "It felt like the only honest thing I'd done in years." Lawson's hands went still. He looked at her, really looked, in a way that had nothing to do with the bruises or the situation, or the data on the laptop, the way someone looks when they are deciding whether to say the true thing or the safe thing. In 4 years of running that building, he said, every analyst I've had, every compliance team, every consultant on a 6-figure retainer, not one of them found what you found in 2 hours with a standard query build and a cup of bad office coffee. He set down the gauze. His hand moved, slow enough that she tracked it, to cup her jaw, and he waited a half-second to make sure she didn't pull away. She didn't. You have a mind I have been looking for since I started this company. I just didn't know what it looked like until yesterday. It looks like a woman in a second-hand cardigan with smudged glasses, Bex said. It looks exactly like that, Lawson said quietly, and it is the most important thing that has walked into my building in 4 years. She wasn't sure who moved first. She thought maybe it was both of them at once, pulled by the same logic, the gravity of 2 days' worth of adrenaline and terror, and unexpected, impossible tenderness. The kiss was not delicate. It was the kind of kiss that comes from relief. His hand at the back of her head, her fingers closing around the lapel of his jacket, the split on her lip making itself known in a way she completely ignored. When they separated, the loft was very quiet. Lawson pressed his forehead to hers. His thumb moved along her jaw. Greaves sent those men tonight, he said, which means he knows you have the routing records. It means he's panicking, and panicking men make mistakes. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and his expression had gone very clear and very cold and very decided. Tomorrow morning, I'm taking everything on that drive to the U.S. Attorney's office. Devon Greaves has been bleeding this company, endangering the patients relying on those hospital networks, and putting people like you in danger to cover it. That ends. He paused. He is done. Bex leaned into his hand. Outside the high windows of the loft, Chicago was beginning its slow gray approach toward dawn. The city lights catching the low clouds, turning the sky that flat amber color she'd always found strangely beautiful. Somewhere south, a freight train moved through the dark. She had come to work on Thursday as the woman nobody looked at, the analyst in the corner cubicle. The name on the internal directory that nobody clicked when they were looking for something important. She had walked through 2 days at the center of something enormous, and come out the other side with bruised wrists and a split lip, and the routing records to dismantle a $3.8 million fraud sitting on a flash drive in the pocket of the most dangerous man she had ever met, a man who had crouched in front of her in a Pilsen loft and held her face like she was something that mattered. Sutter's voice carried from the front of the building. Boss, movement on the north camera. Lawson straightened. The tenderness reorganized itself, pulled back into the hard, deliberate intelligence she'd first seen across that desk. He was already moving toward the door. He looked back at her once. Stay here, he said, and then, Bex. She looked at him. You're not going back to that corner cubicle. He was gone before she could answer, and she sat in the thin amber light of the Chicago morning, her heart loud in her chest, thinking that for the first time in as long as she could remember, she had absolutely no desire to disappear. Devon Greaves was still out there. The men on the north camera were only the beginning, and Bex Danner, who had spent 28 years perfecting the art of invisibility, had just become the most dangerous variable in the room.